Welcome to Preeminent Test Prep. Today is day 66 in my 90-day SAT prep series. Today I'll be taking you through some tips and tricks I have for the math section of the SAT as well as the writing section for the SAT. So I've made a playlist of SAT writing tips and tricks as well as a playlist of SAT math tips and tricks. So today's video is going to have a compilation of some of my favorite of those math tricks and tips and my favorite SAT writing tips and tricks that I want you to know before you take the next SAT practice test and before you take the SAT. So this video is going to have those. They'll all be together in one video, so you don't have to go find the playlist. You can just continue watching this video. What they're going to do is they're going to help you find ways to be more efficient when you're taking the math and SAT writing sections. So obviously the last 2 days we're focused on the SAT reading section. Today we're transitioning back to the math section and the writing section. Now these tips and tricks videos, they're designed to teach you ways to be very efficient and to find the right answer very, very quickly. Now at the same time, they're also designed to make sure you're getting to that answer correctly, right? Making sure that you're getting to the correct answer. So keep in mind, if they do seem like they're getting to the correct answer fast, that's okay. That's what they're designed to do. So hopefully they are helpful, and with that, we're going to go ahead and get started with a compilation of SAT math tips and tricks, and then switch over to SAT writing tips and tricks. So here's an SAT math section tip. Whenever you see a stacked equation set like this, what I'm putting this box around, what you're going to want to do if you're asked to solve for the solution x, y to the system of equations above is take a look at your answer choices, find if x or y has all different numbers. In this case, x has all different numbers, but y has two -6's. So I'm going to solve for x. Now, to solve for x when I have a stacked problem like this, I'm going to want to get rid of y. In this case, I have 4y up top, so I want to get 4y down below, and then I want to subtract them. Okay, so I multiply this bottom equation, I multiply that whole equation by 2, thus giving me 2 times 2y, which is 4y. Then I'm going to subtract it. So I have 4y minus 4y. That gets rid of my y's, so I'm going to have 0y then. I'll have 3x then, minus 2 times negative x. 2 times negative x gives me negative 2x. If I'm subtracting negative 2x, that's adding 2x. So I have 3x plus 2x, which will give me 5x. And then I'll have that then set equal to negative 23. So negative 23 minus 2 times negative 19. 2 times negative 19 gives me negative 38. Subtracting a negative 38 gives me plus 38, and that's going to leave me with 15. Therefore, I'm going to have 5x equals 15. At that point, I'm going to divide each side by 5 to solve for x, and I will see that x is going to equal 3. There's only one answer choice where x is 3, so I know B will be my answer. So anytime that I see a stacked equation set like this up top, and I'm asked to solve for the solution x, y, that's what I'm going to look to do. I'm going to look to add or subtract my bottom equation from my top equation in order to get rid of one of my variables and solve for the other variable. And then by solving for that other variable, if I'm smart about it, oftentimes I'll be able to get my correct answer choice without even solving for the other one. Alright, here's an SAT math trick for you. Anytime you see you're given an equation up top with a bunch of different variables like m, r, n, and p, what you're going to want to do is zoom out, just take a look at your answer choices and see if you're just asked to solve for what one of them equals. In this case, we see we're just asked to solve for what p is equal to. Okay, we also see that at the end of our question. So now we just have to rearrange and solve for p. Now, you may be looking at this equation thinking, man, that's a lot of numbers. It's going to be tough to solve for p. But it really isn't, because take a look at this. What if I was to say m equals 1 over 2 times p? Well, in order to solve for p then, I would just multiply each side by the reciprocal, which is 2 over 1. Now, when I do that, I see I'd just be left with 2 over 1 times m equals p. Well, if we look at what we originally had m equals 1 over 2 times p. Now we see that all we did is we flipped what was in our denominator, which I'm going to put in a box here, and I'll put it in a green box so you can see it better. All we did was flip what was in our denominator, and now we put it in our numerator by m. Then we took what was in our numerator by p, which was a 1, and we put it in our denominator by m. Okay, so all we did is we just flipped our numerator and our denominator and put it on the other side. So that's all we're going to do here as well. We'll take our denominator right here next to p, and we'll take it and we'll put it up here in the numerator next to m. Next, we'll just take what was in our numerator next to p, and we put it in our denominator next to m. Okay, now all we got to do is put a line through there. Okay, and now we have our answer. So now all I got to do is look for which answer choice has this -1 in its numerator. I take a look. I see the only option with that -1 in its numerator is option B. Therefore, B is going to be my answer. Okay, so I'll zoom out so you can see that full question real quick. Okay, zoom out a little bit more. So now you can see that full question. So you see how easy it is once you recognize that all you got to do is flip your numerator and your denominator and put it on the other side, and that gets you your answer. So hopefully that was helpful. Alright, so here's an SAT math trick for you. This is question 12 from SAT Practice Test 1. So the trick is this. If you're told a line in the xy plane passes through the origin and has a slope of 1/7 and you're asked for which point lies on the line, well, you can go ahead and say your equation is going to be y equals 1 over 7 times x, since 1/7 is your slope. And since you pass through the origin, that's point 0 and 0, which means that your y-intercept is 0. So that'd be plus 0. Now, what you got to understand then is when you're asked for these points, you don't have to plug in these points, because if you plug in all those points, it's going to take you a long time. What you can recognize is you can go ahead and recognize that x has to be greater than y, right? X has to be greater than y, because in order for y to equal x, x is going to have to equal 7 times whatever y is. So x has to be equal to 7 times y, right? So x has to be greater than y. So just looking at options A through D then, which is the only answer in which x is greater than y? Well, there's only one answer in which x is greater than y, and that's answer D. So D has to be your correct answer. Alright, so here's an SAT math trick for you. So this problem here, it's not too difficult, and you can solve it in a couple different ways, but the fastest way to solve this, in my opinion, would be to say if 3r equals 18, and I'm asked what the value of 6r plus 3 is, a mistake, in my opinion, would be go through and solve for r. Okay? Solving for r is going to take you a lot longer than if you were to say if 3r equals 18, I know that 3r times 2 gives me 6r, so I take 18 times 2, that's going to give me 36. 36 plus 3, that equals 39. Okay, notice how much faster that is than if I was to divide each side by 3 here, and then get 18 over 3 equals 6, then plug 6 in for r, do 6 times 6, and then add 3. Notice how many more steps that is versus if I just recognize that if 3r equals 18, then 6r has to equal double 18, since 3r times 2 is 6r. 18 times 2 is 36, 36 plus 3, that must be 39. Okay, so just recognize how many less steps it is if I just recognize 3r, and now I'm asked about 6r. Well, if 3r is 18, I double 18, that gives me 36. 36 plus 3, that's 39. Okay, that takes a lot less time than if you divide each side by 3 and solve for r and then plug r in. Okay, so that's one tip you can use to save time on the SAT math section. Here's an SAT math trick you can use to save time. In a right triangle, one angle measures x, where sine of x equals 4/5. What is the cosine of 90 minus x? Well, the answer is also going to be 4/5. Okay, so how did I answer that in less than a second? Well, anytime I'm told that the sine of angle x is 4/5, and then I'm told that the cosine of angle 90 minus x is equal to something, it has to be the same. Okay, the sine of angle x must equal the cosine of angle 90 minus x. So why is this? Well, I can show you this very quickly, actually. If I was to draw a right triangle, so let's go ahead and draw a right triangle. Okay, we'll label this angle right here x. Okay, so we'll label that angle x, then this angle right here, we'll call that angle y. Okay, well, that angle y, since this is a right angle right here, that angle y has to equal 90 minus the angle x. Since angle x plus angle y must equal 90, therefore angle y must equal 90 minus the angle x. So now when we do that, if we're going to go ahead and plot that 4/5, we know that the sine is the opposite over the hypotenuse. Okay, so our opposite then of angle x would be 4, and our hypotenuse would be 5. Now we're asked for the cosine of 90 minus x, which we know in this case is angle y. Well, the cosine, we know that the cosine is the adjacent over the hypotenuse. We see the adjacent side length to angle y is 4, and we see that the hypotenuse is 5. So once again then, that cosine of 90 minus angle x, or the cosine of y, must equal 4/5. Okay, so that shows you geometrically that the cosine of angle 90 minus angle x is equal to the sine of angle x. Okay, so that shows you that they're going to be equivalent, and therefore if you know that, then you don't have to write anything other than this 4/5, because you immediately recognize when you're told that the sine of x is 4/5 that the cosine of 90 minus x must also be 4/5. So that right there can save you a lot of time. So here's an SAT math trick you can use to solve this problem. So it says, which of the following expressions is equivalent to x squared minus 2x minus 5 over x minus 3? Well, if we take our numerator, and let's call our numerator f of x. So let's say then f of x equals our numerator, which is x squared minus 2x minus 5. Well, then what we can do is if we call our denominator x minus a, we know then that f of whatever a is will give us our remainder over x minus 3. Okay, so whatever f of a equals, that's going to be our remainder. Now keep in mind our remainder has to be divided by that x minus 3, since that's what's in our denominator. But by doing this, we can find our answer really quickly because we see all of our remainders are different. So this will help us get to our answer really quickly. So we know that we're just going to be plugging in a for x in this equation, f of x. Now in this case, we know that our denominator is x minus 3, therefore a will be 3. So now we can just go ahead and solve. So now that you know this trick, watch how quickly I can solve this. I plug in, I'm just doing f of 3. That's going to equal 3 squared minus 2 times 3 minus 5. 3 squared is 9. 9 minus 2 times 3, that's going to be minus 6, and then minus 5. 9 minus 6 leaves me with 3. 3 minus 5 leaves me with negative 2. My only answer with this negative 2 here is going to be answer choice D, so D will be my answer. So notice how much quicker that was than actually writing out this full division problem right here. Okay, if I was to take the time and do that full division problem, that's going to take me a lot longer than that, about 30 seconds or less, that it took me to solve for what f of 3 was. Okay, so that's a little SAT math trick you can use to save time. So keep in mind that that's for when your numerator, you call your numerator f of x, and then in your denominator it has to be x minus a, and then a is the value that you're going to plug in for your x in that f of x to solve for your remainder. And that'll get you your remainder, but keep in mind you have to put your remainder then over your denominator, which in this case was x minus 3. So hopefully that was helpful, and hopefully you can use that on the SAT math section to save some time. Alright, so I've got an SAT math trick for you, and I'm going to show you using two different problems today from SAT Practice Test 7. So if we take a look at question 16, it says if 2x plus 8 equals 16, what's the value of x plus 4? So the trick here is understanding ratios. So if we see we have 2x plus 8, I know that immediately that if I divide that by 2, I'm going to get x plus 4. So if I divide 2x plus 8 by 2, I get x plus 4. So what I do then is I divide 16, and I take that and I divide it by 2 to get my answer, which will be 8. Okay, if you can recognize ratios like that, then what you can do is you can find your answer choice really, really quickly without going through and solving for x there and then plugging in x for x plus 4. Okay, because if you go through, you subtract 8 from each side here, right? Subtract 16 minus 8, then you divide each side by 2 to solve for x, you get what x equals, and then you plug it in over here. That's going to take a long, long, long time. So the faster way to do this is to recognize, okay, I have 2x plus 8. I know if I divide that by 2, I have x plus 4. So I divide 16 by 2 then, and when I divide 16 by 2, I get 8. So understand, if you can recognize those ratios, you're going to be able to get to your correct answer much, much faster. So that's a trick that you can use there. Now, we can look at this again with question 18. Okay, question 18, it says the number of radians in a 720-degree angle can be written as a over pi, where a is a constant. What is the value of a? Well, we know that there are 360 degrees in a circle, and we also know that there are 2 pi radians in a circle. Well, what do I notice immediately? Well, I notice that 360, if I multiply that by 2, then that is going to give me 720. So what do I want to do? Well, I want to multiply that 2 pi then by 2 as well, which would give me 4 pi, in which case the value of a is 4. So once again, if we can recognize that ratio, right, that ratio of 720 being double 360, then I can just double that 2 pi and get 4 pi, so my answer's got to be 4. So if you can recognize ratios on the SAT math section, it's definitely going to save you time, and it's definitely going to help you get to that correct answer much, much faster. Alright, I'm about to show you an SAT math trick you can use to save you some time. So the graph of a line in the xy plane passes through the point 1, 4 and crosses through the x-axis at point 2, 0. The line crosses the y-axis at the point 0, b. What is the value of b? So what a lot of people will do here is they'll use these two pairs of points, this point 1, 4 and this point 2 and 0, and they'll use that to create their equation y equals mx plus b, and then they'll plug in 0. And that will get you to the correct answer as far as solving for b. Right, when you plug in 0 for x in your equation, but there's a faster way to do this. In the SAT math section, you want to save as much time as you can. So what is the faster way to do this? Well, if you're going ahead and you're making that formula and using that equation for a line, that's going to take you a long time. So what you can do instead, since we see we have a point 0 for x, is we see when we go from 2 to 1, so going back 1x, we go up by 4. Okay, so if we were to go back another 1 from 1, we're going to get to 0. We just add another 4 then, and we get 8. So our answer then is going to be 8. Okay, so we see by doing that, we're saving all that time that we would take using these two pairs of points and creating that formula for a line and then plugging in 0 and then solving for b, and we just take that and we save so much time by just recognizing when we go from 2 to 1, we go up by 4, so going from 1 to 0, we're going to go up another 4. 4 plus 4 will give us 8. 8 is our correct answer. So look at how much time we save by doing that, rather than calculating our slope and then calculating our y-intercept using our two pairs of points. Notice how much quicker it is just to go over 1, over another 1, up 4, and then up another 4. Okay, so see how much quicker that is than if you were to go ahead and calculate your equation y equals mx plus b, and then solving for when that is 0. Okay, so that's just one tip that you can use to save some time there. Alright, so I have an SAT writing tip for you. So in this case, my writing tip is related to question 43. So this is going to be about matching tense and also matching your subject's number to your verb's number. Okay, so in this case, we're going to be working for question 43. So let me give you a little bit of context here. Grocery stores, convenience stores, and numerous other businesses have been able to thrive in their respective industries while paying significantly higher employee wages than their rivals. The success of these businesses highlight. Okay, now what I see here is I have a verb in the middle of my sentence. If I have a verb in the middle of my sentence underlined, I'm looking to do two things more than likely. The first thing that I'm looking to do is to match my subject's number. I want to match my subject's number to my verb's number. Okay, so I want to match my subject's number to my verb's number. Okay, so I want to make sure that my subject, if my subject's singular, I need my verb to be singular. If my subject is plural, I need my verb to be plural. And then the second thing I'm looking to do is match tense, right? I want it to be in the same tense. So those are the two things that I want to do. So in this case, I have the word highlight. Now keep in mind, I know since all of my other verbs here are highlight as well, I know I'm not dealing with a question about tone or about word choice. So since it's not a question about word choice and it's a verb underlined in the middle of a sentence, I want to make sure it matches the number of my subject and also matches the tense of the rest of my paragraph or the rest of my sentence. Okay, so in this case, I saw I had the verb thrive up here. I see that thrive is present tense, so I want to be in the present tense. Okay, so I know my tense then will be present tense. The next thing that I know is I need to match my subject's number to my verb's number. So I have my verb highlight. Now I need to identify the subject. So I have the success, and then I have of these businesses. Now, here's the big thing that's going to trick most people. They're going to think that their verb has to be plural because they see the word businesses next to it. Now, that's incorrect. Okay, your verb needs to be singular, but why? You need to understand the why here. Your subject is not businesses. Your subject is the success. Okay, and I'm actually going to put that in green so that way you can see that that is our subject. Okay, so I'm going to differentiate that from something else real quick. So the success, that right there is our subject. Now we know that the success, that's singular. Okay, so your subject is going to be singular and therefore your verb will have to be singular. Now why is your subject not of these businesses? Well, of these businesses is a prepositional phrase, and when you're determining whether your subject is singular or plural, you have to ignore prepositional phrases. So you actually would cross out of these businesses. You'd see your subject is the success. You know the success is singular, therefore your verb highlight has to be a singular verb as well. Now, in determining whether it should be highlight or highlights, since we already know it's present tense, since it's present tense, we can get rid of would highlight and have highlighted because those both are not present tense. Right, so now we can go ahead and take a look at highlights versus highlight. Now, if we're going to use the singular version, which we are here since the success is singular, we would say he highlights, right? We'd say he highlights. That's what we'd say if we were in conversation, right? That matches our singular he to our singular verb highlights. Therefore, since we have singular the success, we need to have singular verb highlights. So our answer for 43 would be D. Now, if we had a plural subject, we would say they highlight, right? And that's a trick that you can use if you're ever unsure which form of a verb is singular versus plural, then go ahead and use he versus they, or you can use she. She works as well. But go ahead and use he or she and then they, right? If you would use the verb that you would use with they, that's going to be your plural verb, and the verb that you would use with he or she, that's going to be your singular verb. So that's a tip that you can use to help you identify whether or not a verb is singular versus a plural verb. So that's one thing that some people get confused on. And then the other thing that can trip you up is if you're not crossing out these prepositional phrases. When you're determining the subject, you want to cross out prepositional phrases. Now, things that indicate a prepositional phrase would be a word like of. Okay, when we see of these businesses right next to our subject, the success, we want to make sure that we're ignoring that prepositional phrase. So hopefully that was helpful. Alright, so today I've got two SAT writing tips for you, kind of wrapped into one video. The first SAT writing tip is really just a grammar rule that you have to follow, and the second one is really a specific tip to the SAT writing section. So let's just go ahead and quick knock out the first tip. So we've got, when Professor Zeynep Tan at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology compared two chains of warehouse club stores, there has to be a comma after here. How do I know that? Well, I know that because this is an introductory dependent clause. So we have a dependent clause right at the beginning of our sentence. If we have a dependent clause beginning our sentence, what we know is we have to have a comma after the last part of that dependent clause. Now the last part of that dependent clause is the word stores, therefore our answer for 37 has to be B because we need a comma after the last part of our dependent clause. Now one thing that you can use to kind of tell when you have an introductory dependent clause like this, keep in mind the word introductory just means it's at the start of your sentence, is if you have a subordinating conjunction. In this case, when is a subordinating conjunction. You can look up a list of subordinating conjunctions on Google and take a look at those to familiarize yourself with them. I would recommend doing that after watching this video. So you have when Professor Zeinab Tan at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology compared two chains of warehouse club stores. That's my introductory dependent clause. After that, I must have a comma. Okay, so that's your first tip. That's really just a grammar rule though. Now here we get into our second tip. Now this tip is really the one that, in my opinion, is just something that is a really, really good thing that you need to know, and it's a good strategy, and I really want to take some time and explain it here. So when we have, he's comparing two chains of warehouse club stores, one with better average pay and benefits, and another with lower employee wages, she found that the average number, okay, and I'm going to put this in green because this is what I want to focus on. She found that the average number of sales per employee at the higher wage club was double, and then I have a subject right here. Okay, I'm going to put my subject, I'm going to draw that in black so you can see where my arrow is pointing. Okay, see right here, this is my subject. Now keep in mind that this is at the lower wage club store. So I'm comparing what you saw up here, the average number at the higher wage club store, to what at the lower wage club store. Now the reason I went slow there is so that you could kind of see this. Okay, notice how I'm comparing two different things. I'm comparing that higher wage club store, right? I'm comparing that average number of sales per employee at the higher wage club store, to something at the lower wage club store. Well, that something has to be the number. Okay, the answer there has to be C. Why can't it be the employees? I know that we see employee right here, but why can't we compare the employees? Well, we can't compare employees because of sales per employee is a prepositional phrase describing this average number. Okay, so if we have a prepositional phrase like that, we got to keep in mind we're not comparing what's in the prepositional phrase, we're comparing the subject. The subject is the average number. Okay, she found that the average number of sales per employee at the higher wage club was double the number at the lower wage club. It's not double the employees. It's not double the employees. It is double the number. Okay, so we have to make sure we're comparing our subjects correctly. It's not double the one, so B is wrong. It's not double the employees, and we can't just delete it because we have to compare it to something else. In this case, we're comparing numbers, right? The average number, and then of sales per employee, that's a prepositional phrase, so we ignore it. Okay, our subject is the average number. Therefore, we need to compare the number to the other number. So the average number, compare it to the number at the lower wage club store. So right there, the big tip there is understanding that you have to compare two of the same subjects, right? So if you're asked a comparison question, make sure you're comparing the same things. If you're comparing one number, you must be comparing it to another number. You can't compare a number from a given set of data to an employee, right, of another set of data. If you have a lower wage club store and a higher wage club store, and you're comparing a number at one, you must be comparing it to a number at the other. You can't switch that and do a different subject. So that's the tip there. Today I have two SAT writing tips for you. So the first SAT writing tip I have deals with connecting a dependent clause to an independent clause in order to avoid unnecessary repetition. And the next SAT writing tip I have for you deals with placing a sentence within a paragraph in order to save time and be the most efficient that you can be on the SAT writing section. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So today we're going to be doing questions 19 through 22 on SAT Practice Test 6. And the reason that this tip video is going to take 4 questions to do is because I want to show you something to do with pacing and being efficient. Okay, so the first thing that I see when I look at this passage here from SAT Practice Test 6 is I see I have a 1 there. Now anytime that I see I have a 1 at the beginning of a paragraph, I know I'm going to be dealing with placing a sentence. So I'm going to go down and find the sentence I have to place. I see in this case it is sentence 5. So I have to place sentence 5. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to read sentence 5 before I start reading my paragraph. So I see sentence 5 is right here. I have Berland, and then I have anytime that I have a question within that first sentence that I have to read to place it, I go ahead and answer that question as I read the sentence. So I'll go ahead and do that. So we have Berland advocated using soil extraction, removing small amounts of soil from under the tower's north side. Okay, in this case, I see that I'm tested on being idiomatic. Okay, if you don't know what idiomatic is, it just means that you're basically writing as you would if you were talking, right? Say that I was going to tell you that Berland advocated using soil extraction, right? Nothing is wrong with that. That sounds perfectly grammatically correct. But what if I said Berland advocated to use soil extraction? Well, that's not idiomatic, right? The key part that makes that wrong is the part to use, okay? We wouldn't say he advocated to use soil extraction. We would say he advocated using soil extraction. So idiomatic questions, or idiom questions, if you want to call them that, they deal with pretty much how you would normally talk, right? What would you say? What prepositions would you use? What word choice would you use? Things like that. So in this case, it's really dealing with prepositions, right? And also verbs, right? So in this case, advocated is going to act as the main verb, right? And then using is going to talk about that soil extraction. Okay, so our answer for 21 there is going to be A. We wouldn't say advocated the using of soil extraction because that's really, really wordy. Okay, that's wordy. We don't want to be wordy. And then D, advocating to use soil extraction. Once again, that's also wordy. Okay, it's not concise and it's also not idiomatic. Okay, so answer choices B and C, they're both not idiomatic. They both are a little bit wordy. And then option D, there's no main verb there. Okay, and then with option A is perfectly fine. Option A is our correct answer. It's idiomatic. It functions grammatically correct, so A is our correct answer for 21. Okay, so now keep in mind I'm reading through sentence 5. I have Berlin advocated using soil extraction, removing small amounts of soil from under the tower's north side opposite its tilt to enable gravity to straighten the tower. All right, so now after I've read my sentence, what I do is I come up with what should come before and what should come after the sentence. Then as I read through my paragraph, I can place it. Okay, so what should come before this? Well, I see I talk about Berlin advocating using soil extraction. So what comes before it? Well, I should talk about Berlin before it. Okay, so I should talk about Berlin, who he is, and what kind of his expertise is before this. So before sentence 5, I want to talk about Berlin. Now after sentence 5, I want to talk about this policy he's advocating, this soil extraction. So after sentence 5, I want to talk about soil extraction. Okay. So since he's advocating it here, I'd be looking for something with him now doing it. After he advocated it, it's either successful in his advocation or not successful in his advocation, but I want to talk about something with him doing soil extraction if he is successful in his advocation. So now we can read through and place that sentence as we read. Now notice how much more time that's going to save us, because if we were to read through this whole paragraph and then go back and place sentence 5, we'd have to reread it again, and this way we only have to read it once, which saves us time. So we have enter committee member John Berlin. Now we have a comma. Okay, I see I have the word he is. So this is my other SAT writing tips for today. Now the first SAT writing tip is dealing with placing that sentence 5, right? Talking about how to place sentences and save time. The other one is connecting a dependent clause to an independent clause to avoid repetition. Now in this case, I say John Berlin, and then I have a comma and I have the word he is. I don't want to do that because I just said who it was. So me repeating the word he, or repeating Berlin as an option B, or repeating his in option C, that's all repetitive, and I don't want to be repetitive. The two main things that you want to avoid on the SAT writing section are repetition and redundancy. If you can avoid those two things, it's going to help you out a lot. So in this case, I don't want to say Berlin again, and I don't want to say his again, I don't want to say he again. So options A through C are going to be wrong. What I want to do is I just want to delete that underlined portion, keep that comma there, which it has to be kept anyway since it's not underlined, and then just say a geotechnical engineer from England who saved London's clock tower, Big Ben, from collapse. Okay, that's using a dependent clause, right? That whole thing, I'll put it in blue, right? From here all the way to collapse. That's a dependent clause that's being connected to my independent clause, which I'm going to put in green by that comma. Okay, so that's grammatically correct. That works. D would be our correct answer for 19. Okay, so that's the first SAT writing tip. So now we just keep reading to go ahead and answer where we're going to place sentence 5. Now keep in mind, what did we just talk about? Well, we just talked about John Berlin. Now what did I say needed to become before sentence 5? Well, what needed to come before sentence 5 was a discussion of who John Berlin is and what his expertise was. In this case, we talk about John Berlin. We say he's an engineer from England who saved Big Ben from collapse. So we're talking about how he's an expert in geotechnical engineering, and his name is John Berlin. So we're introducing this character who now in sentence 5 is advocating a policy of soil extraction to help save something from collapse, right? Let me see if I can scroll down, right, to help save this tower from collapse. So let's look at sentence 2 and see if that has what comes after, because we've already found what should come before it. Let's double check that by making sure what comes after then is a discussion of that soil extraction. So we have Berlin began a years-long process of drilling out small amounts of soil, which is soil extraction. So therefore we know that we're going to place it after sentence 1. So sentence 5 needs to come after sentence 1, okay, because it matched what we talked about and what should come before that sentence and what should come after. Now we can go ahead and read on and solve for number 20 real quick. So we have Berlin began a years-long process of drilling out small amounts of soil from under the tower that took several years to complete. Okay, I need to get rid of this whole part right here, right, that I just said, that whole underlined portion. How do I know I need to delete all of that? Well, I just said, and I'm going to put this, I'll highlight it for you. I just said that it was a years-long process. Okay, a years-long process is the same thing as taking several years to complete. Okay, so I'll highlight that as well. Since those two are the same thing and we can't get rid of a years-long process, we want to get rid of the fact that it took several years to complete, because that's just repetitive and redundant. And like I said, the two big things we want to avoid in the SAT writing section are repetition and redundancy. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of those. So our answer would be D, delete the underlined portion. So hopefully you can see how that that strategy is going to save you time, right? By going ahead and finding sentence 5 as your first step whenever you see a 1 at the start of a paragraph, what that's going to do is that's going to let you only read through that paragraph once. Now you see that this paragraph's pretty big. Imagine if you had to read through that twice because you read through the first time and then you got to question 22, realized, oh, I have to place sentence 5, then you had to read through and find where to place it. Now by going to sentence 5 first, what you're doing is you go to sentence 5, you come up with what should come before it and what should come after, and then you're able to place your sentence as you read. So you notice when I read John Berland here up top in our first sentence and talked about how he was a geotechnical engineer, that matched with what I thought should come before sentence 5. Therefore, I knew as long as sentence 2 matched what I thought should come after, I could go ahead and place it after sentence 1, which I ultimately did. So by doing that, it saved me time because I only had to read through one time in that paragraph. Okay, now our other big tip there was dealing up here with connecting our dependent clause to our independent clause with a comma in order to avoid that unnecessary repetition of he is or Berland or his being, since we just said our subject John Berland and we don't want to repeat our subject twice. Okay, so hopefully that was helpful. Today I have an SAT writing tip I want to share with you. Two of the big themes of the SAT writing section are avoiding repetition and then also avoiding redundancy. So when you're going through and you're answering these questions, what you want to make sure that you're doing is you want to make sure that you're avoiding phrases or words that are repeats of other words that were earlier in the sentence, or phrases or ideas that were repeated earlier on in the passage. So an example that I'm going to show you today is from SAT Practice Test 6, and it deals with question 20. So if we take a look at the sentence in question 20, it starts right here. It's sentence number 2. It says, Berland began a years-long process of drilling out small amounts of soil from under the tower that took several years to complete and then monitoring the tower's resulting movement. Now, if something jumped out to you, I would hope that it would be this right here that I'm going to put in green. We have the word a years-long process, or the phrase a years-long process, and then we have that took several years to complete. Now, those two things mean the same thing, and saying that took several years to complete is the same as a years-long process. Now, what that means is that we're repeating something and we're being redundant. Okay, so we're violating both those rules. We're being repetitive and we're being redundant. So therefore, we want to delete that underlined portion to get rid of that repetition and redundancy. Okay, so that's really a big idea and a big theme with the SAT writing and language section. It's being able to identify repetition and identify redundancy and then remove that repetition and redundancy. So if you can do that, that will significantly help you on the SAT writing section in my opinion. So be sure to watch out for that. Another way that you'll commonly see this is with the word annually. So I'm going to quick write this out up top. So I'm going to move a little bit up so I can show you right here. A lot of times you'll see the word annually used, and then you'll see later on in that same sentence you'll see the word every year. Okay? If you see that, you're going to want to get rid of one or the other. Okay? Because every year means the same thing as annually. So that's an important idea and concept to recognize, is that you want to avoid that repetition and avoid that redundancy on the SAT writing section. Another way that you can see that is with sentence combinations, right? And I'll go ahead and I'll probably have another video on that, so I'm actually going to wait to talk about that, but hopefully that was helpful. Today I have an SAT writing tip I'd like to share with you. On the SAT, you will be tested on your ability to maintain an academic tone and avoid using casual words or slang words in an academic type essay. So what I want to do is I want to go through 2 questions on SAT Practice Test 6 to illustrate this idea and this tip/trick that I have for you. So when dealing with words such as in 24 and in question 25, what I want to do is I want to show you the process and the thought process that I would use to find the correct answer. So let's go ahead and run through 24 real quick. So while the pressures of an aging population, insurance reforms, and health epidemics have increased demand for care, the supply of physicians is not expected to keep pace. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. That sounds really good, and A will be my correct answer, but I want to show you why B through D are wrong to kind of illustrate my point on using casual words and slang in the SAT writing section. So when I have a word like this, in this example it's 2 words, it's keep pace, and it's underlined either in the middle of my sentence or at the end of my sentence, and then I look at my other options, for example A through D, and I see that they're different words, right? They're not just different endings, so it's not pace versus paced or pacing, but they all have different endings, or different root words, I'm sorry, not different endings, they all have different root words, okay? They have maintain the tempo, get in line, move along. Since those are all different root words and have different meanings, what I know I'm looking to do there is I'm looking to do a couple things. I want to maintain my academic tone, because on the SAT writing section, most passages, in my opinion, will have an academic tone. You want to maintain that. So you don't want to sound like you're talking to your friend over text, okay? You want to maintain an academic tone, and you want to avoid, first of all, let me just put maintain up here. You want to maintain an academic tone, and then you also want to avoid slang and casual words. Slang and casual words. Okay? Slang and casual words, they are a no-go for the SAT writing section. You do not want to use them. Okay? So for example, if I look at question 24, me saying that the supply of physicians is not expected to keep pace with this increased demand for care, right? I'll put that in blue. The increased demand for care, we are not expected to have the supply of physicians keep pace with that. Okay, that makes perfect sense. Okay, that's idiomatic. And that's the other thing that I want to put down here is you're also looking for it to be idiomatic. If you don't know what idiomatic means, it just means that it's something that we would say it's grammatically correct, right? It's just something that doesn't sound awkward when we say it. It just sounds normal, right? It doesn't sound awkward. There's no awkward pauses when we say it or anything like that. Okay, so I'm looking to really do three things in a case where I have a word or two words underlined mid-sentence or the end of the sentence, and I have all different root words in my answer choices. I'm looking to make sure I'm maintaining an academic tone. I want to make sure I avoid slang and casual words, and I want to make sure it's also idiomatic. Okay, so in this case, keep pace makes perfect sense. I wouldn't say maintain the tempo because no tempo is described, right? And we were talking about two things, matching the increase of demand with the increase in the supply of physicians, which in this case is not present. Therefore, it's not expected to keep pace. We wouldn't say maintain the tempo. That's not idiomatic there. Now, as far as get in line and move along, those two are way, way, way too casual. Okay, we would not say move along in an academic essay. That does not maintain an academic tone. It's way too casual, way too much like slang. Same thing with get in line. Way too casual, way too much like slang. So SAT writing section, make sure you avoid using slang and casual words. You want to make sure you maintain an academic tone and that you're also idiomatic. So let's go take a look at question 25 because it's also testing your ability to maintain an academic tone, avoid slang and casual words, and also for number 25, it's not really testing your ability to be idiomatic. That one is just testing your ability to maintain an academic tone and avoid slang and casual words. So number 25 is not testing your ability to find something that's idiomatic. That was just one of the answer choices for question 24 that was testing your ability to be idiomatic. But question 25, we have, because a traditionalist response to the crisis, okay, we're talking about the crisis of there being an increased demand for physicians but a lower supply. We have amping up medical college enrollments and expanding physician training programs is too slow and costly to address the near-term problem. Alternatives are being explored. Okay, now we wouldn't say amping up medical college enrollments in an academic essay like this. Okay, amping up is too casual. That's too casual. Okay, and I'm going to put that in green so you can kind of see that it's different from what I'm saying in 24. Okay, it's too casual. Answer choice A, it's too casual. We wouldn't say amping up medical college enrollments if we're writing an academic essay. Now, what about revving up? Once again, that's slang. Okay, we wouldn't say revving up. It's slang and it's too casual. Okay, we don't want to be casual and we don't want to do slang when we're talking about the SAT writing section. We want to be maintaining an academic tone and we want to be really just making sure we're maintaining that academic tone, avoiding slang and casual words. So now let's take a look at options B and C. Okay, I want to show you why C is wrong. Okay, C, the word arousing. We wouldn't say because of traditional response to the crisis, arousing medical college enrollments, because that is just not even really related, right? It's not a correct use of the word arousing. It's just not, it also doesn't fit with an academic tone. So it doesn't have an academic tone. It's also kind of an unrelated word whose definition doesn't really apply here. So C is incorrect. Obviously, answer choice B is correct then. We would say because a traditional response to the crisis, bolstering medical college enrollments, bolstering in that case meaning supporting those medical college enrollments or increasing them. So our answer there would be B. So the big tip that I want you to take away from this video is if you have two words or one word or a couple words underlined in the middle of a sentence or at the end of a sentence as in 24, then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to make sure that you're looking at your answer choices, and if you see that they're all different root words, like in this case for 24 and 25 they had all different root words, then what you want to make sure that you're doing then is taking a look at maintaining an academic tone, which most passages on the SAT writing section have an academic tone, so you want to maintain the tone of the passage, and then you also want to avoid using slang and avoid using casual words, and then also just make sure it's idiomatic, right? There are some questions, for example 25, it wasn't testing your ability to see if it was idiomatic, but part of 24 was. Okay, so just understand that that third thing you want to check for is just whether or not it's idiomatic, right? Would it flow naturally if we were to say it out loud? So hopefully that was helpful. Today I have an SAT writing and language tip that I want to share with you. So anytime that I see that I have one word or two words or a series of words at the beginning of a sentence followed by a comma on the SAT writing section, as I do in question 31, what I'm going to look to do is make sure that I'm connecting or transitioning from my previous sentence, which I'm going to underline in blue. It says Texas researchers found that PAs lend cost-efficient, widely appreciated services in underserved areas. And then with my following sentence. Okay, so I want to connect my previous sentence to my following sentence, which says rural-based PAs often provide a broader spectrum of such services than do their urban and suburban counterparts, possibly as a consequence of the limited pool of rural-based physicians. So whenever I see that I have one word, 2 words, 3 words, 4 words, or a series of words at the beginning of my sentence followed by a comma, I know that what it's looking to test me on the SAT writing section is my ability to transition between my previous sentence into my new sentence, or link my previous sentence to my new sentences. So I'm going to go ahead and write that down. So anytime that I have 1 word, 2 words, 3 words followed by a comma at the beginning of a sentence, I am looking to either, number 1, transition from my previous sentence to my current sentence. So from previous sentence to current sentence, or, so we got that, or number 2, link, and that can be and or, right? They can do both of these things at the same time. If you have the correct transition word, it can do both of them, and link that previous sentence to my current sentence. So link that previous sentence to my current sentence. So those are the two things that I'm looking to do. If I see that I have something like in addition followed by a comma, or however followed by a comma, or anything like that, I want to link that previous sentence to my current sentence, or transition from that previous sentence to my current sentence. Okay, so that's the big tip that I have here for you today. So I want to quick run through that with question 31 because I think it provides a good example of what to look for. So if I read that sentence before it, it says a recent review of the scholarly literature by Texas researchers found that PAs lend cost-efficient, widely appreciated services in underserved areas. Okay, so that's a positive thing that physician assistants do. They're lending cost-efficient and widely appreciated services in underserved areas. So that's a positive thing. So now I'm going to look at my next sentence. I see that it says rural-based PAs often provide a broader spectrum of such services. Okay, providing a broader spectrum of services is a positive thing than do their urban and suburban counterparts, possibly as a consequence of the limited pool of rural-based physicians. So that's also talking about a positive thing that these rural-based physician assistants are doing. Okay, so we're talking about two things that physician assistants are doing well. So if we're talking about two positives, then that's in addition, right? Those two things aren't contrasting each other, they are adding on to each other. So our correct answer for 31 would be A. Now, keep in mind, the word thus, that would indicate a causal relationship. Now, what came in that previous sentence is not causing what occurs in the next sentence. Now, because what came in the previous sentence is not causing what comes in the next sentence, I can't use the word thus, or the word therefore, or the word consequently, or as a result, because all of those would indicate a causal relationship. Now, what about despite this? Well, what came in my previous sentence and what came in my next sentence, right? It's not despite the current sentence, the sentence in green. The sentence in green does not occur despite what the sentence in blue said. So C would be incorrect because that's not linking my two sentences together with a correct transition or correct linking word or linking phrase. Now, what about on the other hand? Well, on the other hand, that's indicating some sort of contrast or some sort of withdraw from one thing to the next, right? And in this case, there's no contrast or no withdrawal. All that it is something that is in addition to the other. So this big tip right here for the SAT writing section is anytime that you see at the beginning of a sentence you have 1 word, 2 words, 3 words underlined followed by a comma, you need to understand that you're being tested to transition from that previous sentence to the current sentence and or link that previous sentence's ideas to that current sentence's ideas. So that's one big thing that you want to know for that SAT writing and language section. And once you identify that, what you want to do is make sure you understand the main idea of that previous sentence and how it relates to that next sentence. Sometimes it'll be something that's in addition to something else. Sometimes it will be a contrast, and if it's a contrast, you want to use something like however or on the other hand, right? Sometimes it'll be something that is a causal relationship. Something in a previous sentence is causing the thing that happens in that current sentence. In that case, you want to use something like consequently, as a result, thus, therefore, something like that. Sometimes the previous sentence will be something that was negative, and then that next sentence will be something that was positive, and it was in spite of what happened before. In that case, you want to use something like despite this or in spite of as your transition. So understand transition words, understand what transition words mean. Another thing I do want to add on, for in addition, anytime you have two ideas that are adding to each other, let's say that you don't have in addition as an option, you don't have additionally as an option, another two that could work there would be furthermore and moreover. So those are two other words that you should know as well. So hopefully that was helpful in understanding how to transition between sentences and how to look and identify that question type. So you'll be able to identify it by that underlining of those first two or one word at the beginning of a sentence followed by a comma is how you can identify that type of question. So hopefully that was helpful. Today I have an SAT writing tip that I want to share with you. So my SAT writing tip today deals with combining the underlined sentences. So on the SAT writing section, sometimes you'll get a question that will ask you which choice most effectively combines the underlined sentences. So what will happen is you'll have two sentences, both of them will be underlined, you have to connect them. So oftentimes what these questions deal with is repetition and redundancy. So a lot of times the two questions, there'll be ideas that are repeated across them or a subject that is repeated across them. And what you'll want to do is you want to get rid of unnecessary repetition and get rid of redundancy. So in these cases, what I'm going to do then, if I see I have a question where I'm asked to combine sentences, what I'll do is I'll read through my sentences in my passage, so that'll be right here. And then as I read through it, what I'm going to try to do is get rid of things that repeat and that are redundant. So that's what I'll go ahead and do. So I have, in addition to being unsightly and odorous, these algal blooms cause oxygen depletion, period, oxygen depletion. Anytime that I see that I have a subject underlined, or I'm sorry, a subject at the end of my sentence, and then I have that same subject at the beginning of my sentence, what I'm always going to look to do is to get rid of that second subject, end with a comma instead of that period. And then what I want to do is include a who, which, or something like that to connect them. So in this case, I have oxygen depletion. Okay, that's not a person, so I can't use who, but what I can use is a comma and then say which. Okay, I can say oxygen depletion, which kills fish and other wildlife in the lakes. Now by doing that, I don't have to say oxygen depletion twice, so that gets rid of that repetition and redundancy. So now what I'll do is I'll take a look at A through D. Now, the thing is, if you want to find your answer choice, you're going to just have to read through them. But here's how you can do this to save time. Now, when you're asked to combine underlined sentences, obviously you want to be as efficient with your word choice as possible, or as concise as possible. Now, if you're trying to be concise, you're more likely to use less words. So what I do on the SAT writing section is if I'm reading through these answer choices, I don't read A through D. What I do is I read my shortest ones first. So I would read D first, I would read A second, I would read B third, and C fourth. Now keep in mind, if answer choice D, when I read it first, if it's perfect, I'm not going to read A through C until the end when I go back through and check my work after I've answered all my other questions, because otherwise I'm wasting time if I know D is going to be correct. So I'll go ahead and read through D. We have, in addition to being unsightly and odorous, these algal blooms cause oxygen depletion, which kills fish and other wildlife in the lakes. Okay, that's as concise and efficient as possible. It's also grammatically correct. Now I want to cover a few things when we're asked to combine underlined sentences. There are a couple things you want to watch out for. Okay, one of those is modifiers. Okay, you want to watch out for the following. So I'm actually going to make a list for you right here. So I'm going to write watch out for and then ... Okay, now keep in mind this is for questions where you're asked to combine underlined sentences. These are the things you want to watch out for. Okay, one of the things that you want to watch out for is modifiers. So a lot of times on when combining sentences like this, one of your sentences, it'll have a modifier that can be used to describe a subject. So for example, you could have a subject, let's say that your subject was Abraham Lincoln, right? Say Abraham Lincoln took the place of oxygen depletion here. It was ending one sentence and then it was starting the next, right? If it's ending one sentence and starting the next, Abraham Lincoln was, and let's say that the next sentence described Abraham Lincoln, we'd want to watch out for a modifier at the beginning of our sentence describing him. So remember that with modifiers, you have to have your modifying phrase or clause followed by a comma, and then you have to have who or what it is modifying directly after. So you want to watch out for something where you have a modifier and then you don't have something that it's modifying directly after, because you have to have what it's modifying directly after that comma, after that introductory modifier. So keep that in mind. You have to watch out for modifiers. The other thing that you have to do is make sure your sentence is obviously grammatically correct. Okay, you have to have a grammatically correct sentence. Okay, so that's another thing you need to look out for when combining sentences like this. Now, another thing that you need to do, and this one is pretty important and it can kind of trick some people up. You want to make sure that you're progressing in a logical order. Okay? For example, if you have something that is a causal relationship between the two sentences, you want to make sure that whatever the cause is comes first. You want the cause to come first and the result or the effect of that cause to come second in the sentence. So you want to make sure that you're progressing through a logical order or a sequential order. If it's a causal relationship, you want to say what caused the next thing, right? So the cause first, effect second. So you want to make sure you're progressing in the logical order. So those are really the three big things that you need to watch out for when doing these combining sentences question. Now, a fourth thing, I already touched on this a bit when I went through that question, but was being concise, right? If you don't know what concise means, it means basically being efficient in your word choice or not being repetitive. You want to make sure you avoid repetition and avoid redundancy. And I want to quick show you something as far as repetition and redundancy, that let's say that you read through D and you weren't quite sure if it was your answer. You should be sure, but if you weren't, then let's say that you were going through A, B, and C. I want to show you how you know that those are going to be wrong real quick. So next we would go to 2. We would have, in addition to being unsightly and odorous, these algal blooms cause oxygen depletion, the result being that it kills fish and other wildlife in the lakes. Saying the result being that that's very, very wordy. Okay, we don't want to be wordy when we're combining sentences like this. The other thing I see is that I have the pronoun it, right? If I'm going to use The word it, I know that that's referring to oxygen depletion, and that's kind of just like repeating the word oxygen depletion again, so I wouldn't want to do that. So it's wordy, it's not efficient in its word choice, it's not concise, it's repeating oxygen depletion by using this pronoun it, so A would be incorrect. Now B, in addition to being unsightly and odorous, these algal blooms cause oxygen depletion. These algal blooms, okay, I'm repeating algal blooms twice. That's repetition. We want to avoid repetition at all costs. C, in addition to being unsightly and odorous, these algal blooms cause oxygen depletion and oxygen depletion. Once again, we see we have repetition there. We don't want to repeat words like that. Next, we have D, in addition, right, we already talked about how that's the correct answer, so we already know that. Okay, so hopefully that helps you when you're combining sentences like that. The first step is going to be to read through the passage. Second step, try to get rid of anything that's repetitive. Try to kind of come up with your own answer choice first. Then what you're going to do is you're going to look at your answer choices A through D, and you're going to go through and you're going to read them in the order of shortest to longest. So you'd start with 1 in this case. You're going to number them off. Read your shortest one first. If your shortest one sounds like your correct answer, go ahead and select it and move on, and then come back and check your work after you've answered all the rest of the questions. But yeah, start with your shortest answer choice first when dealing with these combining sentences, questions like that. And then, as always, make sure that you're avoiding repetition and redundancy in your answer choices, and you should be all set there. So watch out for modifiers, make sure it's grammatically correct, make sure it follows a logical order, make sure it's concise, and that should certainly help you with those combining sentences questions. So hopefully that was helpful. If it was, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and as always, have a good day.